Okay, folks, welcome to Unfound on the Ground number 7. Geography and mapping for missing persons cases. Not a big deal like usual, but if you can stay muted unless you're talking, it would be helpful. As always, we can navigate that. And always from a tech standpoint, if I disappear, if something happens, hang in there. We've already begun the session. So if I have an internet problem, I'll either have a reconnection there or I can dial in and participate some, and we can keep the conversation going. So if that happens, right, contingency planning. Again, our title, Geography and Mapping for Missing Persons Cases. We are recording audio only. You can go on video if you want, but it's audio participation is our main thing. Chat is disabled. For the journalistic, promotional, and or commercial purposes of Unfound, the audio recording of this digital meeting will be distributed by Unfound. By participating in this digital meeting, you agree to give Unfound permission to use the audio recording of your words for journalistic, promotional, and or commercial purposes with no compensation to you from Unfound, its assistants, its affiliates, its partners, etc. As always, those are our usual, and we are distributing. We are, this is episode number 7. Things continue to move forward. Again, thanks to our think tank folks for ongoing feedback and suggestions and participation. Episodes 1 through 6, as we know, are available on YouTube, on the YouTube channel. Natasha does a great job there. Of course, Ed and Natasha, but Natasha's doing a lot of the digital work. And so eventually this episode will be available too. I'm Eric Grabowski. I'm part of the Unfound assisting team. I've been a guest on Unfound. And beyond my work in academia, teaching and studying communication, I do cold case journalism. Again, the usual disclaimer, my words tonight don't necessarily reflect the views and so forth of my employing university. Again, always feel free to provide your own disclaimers if you see fit. Don't forget about the unfoundpodcast.com, the unfoundpodcast.com. That is the website for the overall work of Unfound. Again, Natasha and Ed doing a lot of work there. And again, there's the data gem session there, which is a tremendous resource. Continue to visit that and share it. It's a resource even for folks if we're trying to invite them to get interested in what we're doing. And sort of the big picture, that data gems page is an outstanding resource that is slowly, and that's more my fault than Natasha, slowly but surely expanding. Hope everyone had a great New Year. Personally, Happy New Year. Hard to believe it's 2021. Remember what we're talking about tonight, and this is exciting material. Natasha has done another great job contributing material. We will have some of that in the form of her recording, playing again. Some of that material I'll be integrating in, but giving her due credit along the way. This is some of this material, again, it's carrying certain aspects that we discussed last time in number 6. We're keeping in mind some of those cultural elements. We're not necessarily talking about human trafficking, although that's certainly one of many elements of missing persons, but those cultural dimensions, that plays a role in the whole framework or mix of thinking about geography and mapping. A lot of exciting material. The more I dug into this, some of the avenues and prompts that Natasha provided and some things I was studying, and this is likely something, to be, a continued or a part 2 in the future. exciting material. As I was thinking and reviewing the material that Natasha sent, and then looking at some other material, but primarily from what Natasha sent, this is when we're talking about, we know this in general, but when we're looking at these things and why we would be interested in local knowledge, back to Natasha's theme, and geography and understanding place, and of course thinking about it from a mapping standpoint, we know that we have to think both proactively and reactively, and we'll see that with some of Natasha's material. Again, the things that we're talking about, like usual, right? Whether your interest is advocacy or raising awareness, and let me just do a quick admit here. Yep, thank you. We have awareness. If your interest is being an astute audience member, if your interest is doing some sort of journalism, any of those areas, advocacy, awareness, being an astute audience member, and or journalism. Again, we're talking about things that could be helpful along those lines. As always, we're thinking about being accurate and thinking through things accurately to the extent possible. And whether we're talking about raising awareness of missing persons cases in general, issues of prevention, some of which came up last time, and then actually navigating, working through, digging, analyzing for the solving of cases. Just some quick terms. Again, I'm in academia, but I'm not a quantitative or qualitative social scientist. I'm a liberal arts or humanities scholar in communication and rhetorical studies. Obviously, I have to know a little bit about what the different types of data are. But right, we use the term qualitative. We use the term quantitative, and I'm not going to get into every reference now. We'll get some of those on the data gems, but surveymonkey.com and other sources have some good overviews. When we're talking about quantitative data, we're thinking numerically. We're looking at statistics in general, right? That's often what we see, ways in which we can categorize things quantitatively. When we talk about qualitative data, we're getting material through, and again, I also have a piece by a William Trocum, featured by Loyola Marymount, right? When we're thinking about quantitative, we have numbers. Qualitative, often we're words, so focus groups, narratives, interviews. It's often giving the viewpoints, perspective, experiences. Of course, as Trocum mentions, and is generally known, even qualitative data can be coded or quantified. Okay, and we don't need to get too deeply into that here, but just recognize those differences. For what we're interested in, both are important. You'll see that with what Natasha's talking about. Okay, so that's just the basic bottom line there when it comes to quantitative and qualitative data. Both are important. Both are important. Both are important, for sure. Again, I want to go back to what I'm always saying. This is something I say here and elsewhere, right? Someone out there knows something or knows someone who knows something. Now, that's not always directly related to what we're doing tonight. However, you'll see with what Natasha's talking about, there are times when especially when we're thinking about local knowledge and getting to know an area, that, as much as we're talking about places and we're thinking about documents, part of that understanding of the local area has to do with people and what people are carrying on and talking about. So, that notion certainly remains important. So let me jump into this, and, this cultural knowledge question that I had, sort of leading the pack. Natasha has some material straight away, so I'm going to get the sharing going. And let me get this going now.
We know from digital research that there are, on average, about...
Quick sound check, Tanya, can you hear that?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, if one person can hear it, we all can hear it.
20 websites, 20 sites that a person would visit on a daily basis. So that would be their digital circuit. Now, within just one site, let's say YouTube, people may also closely follow 20 or more channels that they're subscribed to. So it doesn't mean that it's only 20 static home pages. It could be, YouTube is almost considered like a feed into the individual's interests. And I hope that the Unfound Podcast Channel is on everyone's digital circuit, the YouTube channel there. So applying the circuit theory to the individual, to a person, and the person can be any person. It can be a suspect, it could be the victim, the person that is unfortunately missing. Think about the people that are in close proximity to the, particularly to the victim. I would definitely start there. So when I say the person, it could be any one of those. What is their circuit? Where do they physically go during the week? And start to figure that out. So anyone that's working, has a 9 to 5 or a 40-hour job or more, usually has to get to their job at a certain time, and there's a certain schedule in order to, make money and earn revenue. So how does this weekday circuit compare and contrast to the weekend? Do they go to church on Sundays? And then with whom are they doing this? Are they driving in with their wife to work, carpool, that kind of thing? So once this is ascertained, something that can be done right away is to zero down on the property. And by that, I mean, let's say it's, 123 Main Street or something. You have an interest in a property. And again, the property can be the victim's property, it can be the suspect's property, or a person of interest.
Okay. This is a significant starting point. Let me quickly mention Natasha also expressed her gratefulness for this opportunity. And of course, we express our gratefulness to her for contributing this to us. This idea of a digital circuit, right? This sort of where we go, what's connected, how we're connected. That could be thought of digitally, right? Or online or offline. And so we have a location, we have an address, and this is something, of course, as Natasha said, a location could be connected to any number of persons with regard to a case. And so one of the resources that she had suggested, Zillow.com. Has anyone here used Zillow.com? Kathy, have you ever used Zillow?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Tammy, have you used Zillow?
Sorry. Yes, quite a bit at work.
Okay. And Tanya, how about you?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so we're familiar with Zillow. And so you can go to Zillow and you have an address. And one of the suggestions that Natasha, Unfound digital producer and expert in some of these areas, had suggested, of course, you can get an address in there, and of course, there's certain things you may have to sign up to do. You can make it a favorite, and you can get updates on that address, right? And you can see, even if you don't join the site, like I put in my zip code, and I can see right away, obviously, these are properties that are on market. One of the things that Natasha mentioned is that you can get updates when things go on market or off market, but regardless, I'm looking at properties here, I'm seeing pictures, I click on a specific property, obviously I'm getting information about the area, right, as I scroll down, right, so we're dealing with, information, and this will get relevant to some other things she says, is we look at different resources to consider an area. Kathy, any suggestions you have about Zillow and some of these things?
Well, just checking nearby properties, the one you're specifically looking at. And I, like on Zillow, they may show you pictures of inside and outside, but then using other resources to find where you can look at kind of the whole area where this home is at or this property.
Yeah.
So used in conjunction with I have used Zillow only for personal or for my family's property or whatever, not at work. But I could see but you can see Zillow has a lot of like tax information, property tax information, maybe people that used to live there. There's all kinds of other things you can look at. I really like Zillow. It's a good one.
Yeah, and if you have an address or a set of addresses, right, then that could be one resource that you could use. Tanya, how about you? Any thoughts here on how Zillow could be used in terms of what Natasha's saying and more?
No, I think Natasha and Kathy said it all. I've just used it personally. And I like that because I'm into looking at real estate properties, but that's about it.
Yeah. So this is definitely something we can put in our toolbox. Tammy, any thoughts on Zillow here for what we're getting at?
Nope, I think they pretty much covered it.
Yeah, so it's a resource, right? But of course, and Natasha, a great suggestion here, and this resonates with us, especially if you're doing any sort of journalistic work. And of course, this gets at some possibilities for crowdsourcing. The idea about boots on the ground, right? Now, if you're in an area where there's a case, of course, you can do that. Obviously, and of course, Unfound covers many cases and whatever other cases you're keeping up, right? Local, regional, national, global, right? Boots on the ground. So if you're able to go to an area, okay. On the other hand, sometimes you're not. And again, with some of the things we're going to talk about here, let me just give the other usual disclaimer. You know, I'm not a lawyer, and Natasha's not a lawyer, and Ed's not a lawyer, and so forth. And so when you're doing some of these things, like make sure, you know, again, we're not giving any legal advice. Make sure you're aware of whatever the local, state, federal applicable laws are. So for instance, if you're somewhere and taking a picture of a property, is something permitted from a sidewalk? You know, what are those laws in that area? And so forth. So be aware of that. But sometimes, even if you're not able to get onto the ground, Natasha had what I think is an interesting suggestion. If you were really intent on wanting to get some information about an area, you know, as we know, there are sites nowadays, and one in particular, TaskRabbit, TaskRabbit.com. That's a suggestion, right? If you wanted to get someone who would be willing to do that, you know, if you wanted certain pictures of an area that they could email to you, obviously on TaskRabbit, you could hire out that work. Again, I'm not as familiar with TaskRabbit. I was probably aware of it. It is an interesting suggestion. There may be other ways of, you know, connecting with or contracting with people to do that sort of work. One would have to discern their comfort level with that. But again, it would be an interesting, if one were interested in a case, you know, 500 miles from them, and they didn't know someone or they didn't have the budget to travel there, and they were really interested in it, presumably they could, if they didn't have contacts or networks, they could hire someone through a site like TaskRabbit and then ask them to take pictures and gather other information as needed. So that's something that's interesting. Another suggestion Natasha thought, and is a GoPro camera. Does anyone here have a GoPro camera? Have heard of this? Okay.
I've heard of it, but I don't have one.
Yeah, I have one more admit here. I'm going to admit Laura. And so interesting thought. So a GoPro, and I'm not an expert on GoPro. I still use a flip phone, by the way. Right, I do have on my laptop if I want to use various applications. But so a GoPro, right, that's a camera. It can be connected to your phone. And so the idea being that one could also link this up to a drone. And so using a drone to canvas the landscape. And again, we're saying make sure that you are aware of various laws. And a drone is not something you just want to do, right? You want to make sure to have proper training or practice. Maybe another idea is partner with someone who's credible and professional, of course, if someone had the budget, to get them to do drone work. Because what drones allow, right, is the ability to take a wider view into more difficult terrain, right? And that's one of the points that Natasha makes. You can pick up on ground disturbances, see variances in easier to difficult terrain. Obviously, we know there are some controversies that go with drones, but that certainly is a very viable way. And as we know, things that are done nowadays with regard to the net and mapping, right? Drones do play a role in that. Does anyone here have any experience with drones? Okay, I don't. I can tell you North Dakota, is a state where people, have and use drones, right? These are things that are used for public or private capacities, for sure, right? So that was an interesting thought that Natasha offered, for sure. But the bottom line, right, for any of these methods, whether you're the boots on the ground or yours, or the boots on the ground or someone else, right? One could get out there, they have an address, they can get material. There's a lot of publicly available material available through the internet. But at some point, getting those boots on the ground, and that of course could lead to other opportunities of maybe people working together to get those photographs, right? Email them to each other and so forth. That'll come up a bit later too when we talk about some crowd work ideas. So back to, again, with Natasha, and as I was thinking through what she provided and some of this other material, when we're looking at maps and we're looking at an area actually in a place, if we're seeing it, if we're looking at maps, maybe we're talking to some local folks, we're looking at what is obvious and then what is subtle about an area, right? What is obvious and what is subtle about an area. Building from the last episode, we have the citation from Natasha, again, James C. Scott, Seeing Like a State, How Certain Schemes to Improve the Human Condition Have Failed, Yale University Press. So when we look at areas from the past to present, taking a historical point of view, right? And that's the element that Natasha is applying from Scott, right? Past to present. We see that over time that communities, particularly how communities are governed, there are ways in which properties and places and people are managed, even to bring revenue, not just in the private sphere, but in the public sphere, the government sector. And so this has an impact on the landscape over time, right, as we get into modern times. And so, we're thinking about the landscape of an area. We look at what's obvious, we look at what's subtle. There's a landscape analysis, right? That's, in a way, that's what we're doing. That's my words there, right? Landscape analysis. And so, taking it back down to properties, if we're looking at one or more properties, drawing from Scott, talking about how things are managed, how things are designed, put together, ordered for some sort of advantage, individually or collectively, at least a perceived advantage, whether that always is the case or not. So you look at a lawn, you look at a location for a property, you learn what you can about that area, and then you start to look at the lawn itself, for instance, right, or in that property, using the lawn as an example. How is it kept, right? Is it intricately manicured? Again, I'm using some of Natasha's thoughts here, right? Or is it more of an approach of let it be, right? Well, what does that say about the person who maintains the property? What does that say about, the property owner? What does that say about people who reside there? Well, in both of those scenarios, or the spectrum that would go somehow between, and the different ways that properties can be kept, well, they're in a case of a crime or an alleged crime, that would provide a scenario or a framework in which you think, well, how might that, whether it's a body to be disposed of or hidden, or some sort of accident that took place, or some sort of cover up, whatever, right? How would the property right there provide an advantage one way or another for someone who's trying to do something not good? And then the person who's, whether it's law enforcement or a journalist or a community, right? Well, if they were investigating that, within their framework, right? How would they think about one of the things that Natasha reminds us of when we're dealing with the thinking about these sorts of things is think like a perpetrator, right? For sure, right? What are the sorts of things? So the more you learn about a particular property or series of property, in terms of the data, in terms of how it's kept, in terms of what it looks like, in terms of the landscape it's on, the landscape surrounding it, the more you can learn about that, the more material it gives you for that sort of what I'm calling here a landscape analysis. One of the things to get local street map, right? That's important, right? If you're studying an area, right? That this idea of local knowledge, though, again, back to episode 6, and now building rapport with local people, police, particularly the police who are on patrol, right? In terms of that, getting to know them, right? In the proper way, professionally, building that rapport with them so that you have some understanding. Another thing this is a safety issue as well as an information issue, right? Being safe, being in communication with important people in your own life when you're doing this. But also, so from a safety standpoint and a collaboration standpoint, here's something. Again, this is Natasha. With your phone, and again, assuming this is a smartphone of some sort or something along those lines, you share your location with Google Maps, and you can regulate whom you give that permission to. Has anyone done that? This coordinating their phone with Google Map? Okay, so obviously that could be a safety issue if you were out doing this sort of work, or just even if you weren't, right? Just sort of a protective thing. But on the other hand, this could also be something if you were doing some sort of collaborative or coordinating work, right? If you were out walking around and making notes about an area, pictures or not, right? Maybe it would be helpful to have some record of that the way in which one had gone through an area. Maybe they were coordinating with a group to get that location data. Again, it's something that you can give permission, sharing that with Google Map. There are probably other functionalities that one can do with respect to that. Of course, then get a more detailed map, right? Natasha, right? Plot boundaries per household, for example. Go to a city planner, right? Get any and all available information. Obviously, sort of implied in past episodes, now more explicitly, we know government websites, city, county buildings, and so forth. There's going to be past to present. Historical maps are going to be available. There's going to be qualitative and quantitative data out there that we can get. Tanya, how about you? Any suggestions for getting local or regional map or geographic material?
No, all of this is a little new to me. I just love hearing about it and learning about it.
Yeah, it is exciting material. There's no doubt about it. Tammy, how about you? Any suggestions about getting that map or geographic information locally?
Well, the thing that I was thinking is kind of what you just talked about. I mean, you can, if you want to look at historical maps, because I live in Dallas, Fort Worth, and whatever map is valid today is probably obsolete a year from now.
Sure.
So you can get historical maps sometimes at the county, if you're looking at a specific county, at the county records.
Yeah.
Zoning, at the county zoning, you can get things like that there.
Yep. And I may mention, and I can't remember if we mentioned this in a past episode or not, a lot of places across the country, whether it's at the city county building or now on these county websites, you can get information, not always necessarily mapped, but the information about the area in terms of property values and tax assessments and so forth, right? That's available. That's public information. Again, those things vary by locale, but that information's out there. Kathy, any suggestions for this sort of local map, where we would go to get some of this local information?
I don't think above and beyond what you already said. I was thinking of some of my trips down to the county recorder getting things. Are you talking about property assessments, different areas, court records maybe
Yeah.
that have to do with property, and like a divorce, dispersing, when people, dissolve their marriages, that kind of thing. So, but I have not done looking for maps other than on the internet. No.
Yeah, no, that's important. Laura, welcome. Laura, can you hear us? Okay, Laura's still logging in. We'll give her a chance. Yeah, what you're saying, Kathy, also reminded me, and I'm no expert in this, but I hear a lot about it here in North Dakota. People that are researching mineral rights, right? People that are researching mineral rights, right? So where there's, people that do oil and gas exploration need to do this because this, and again, state laws vary and so forth. But so they're looking at, right, property deeds and maps and all sorts of things. So again, there may be information out there in those sorts of databases, whether those are online or offline. Laura, can you hear me? Okay. So, so another thing that's important, emphasized by Natasha too, right? Get to know, if you're getting to know an area, and we can see some of the material that's out there through a Zillow and other resources. What are the socioeconomic aspects of neighborhoods, areas, and so forth, right?
I can hear you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Laura. Right, so what are those socioeconomic aspects, right? What are the affluent neighborhoods? What are the middle-class neighborhoods? What are the poorer neighborhoods, right? That's information to know, right? If you're studying a case with respect to an area, right? That's going to give one information in the landscape, right? The geography, how a landscape's kept, even the inside of a house, right? There are going to be elements of that. That's going to tell you things about an area. Of course, we want to be careful not to make stereotypical unfair assumptions, but there are elements of that would be important to know in terms of really understanding the life of an area. And this gets back to some of the emphasis that Natasha brought up in the last episode and with this material, right? An area is living and breathing, and she's getting this from Scott, right? So back to Scott. An area has a history, right? And some of you, one of you at least mentioned this, right? An area has changes. It changes over time, right? And those are the projects in an area, things that the government, public or private entities. There's a standardization that has gone with areas over time, particularly through modern times. Getting to know, right, how developments have taken place. Again, back to what I said about things that are obvious and things that are subtle. And then the more we can know about that area. And with some of our discussion about what Unfound is doing, that'll be important. So back to that idea of local knowledge. And this last episode, this episode, getting to know that local knowledge is so important, right? It impacts the language that people speak, their verbal, their nonverbal communication. The term that Natasha draws from Scott, or the concept, right? There's a geographic dialect, right? That's sort of lived out in the people. And in a way, right, going back, from the medieval times up through the present, thinking about ways in which that knowledge even provides a protection. Right, a literal, one time there being literal walls, and nowadays, even if there are not the walls, there are ways in which that knowledge provides a sense of barrier, and getting to know that, cracking that nut is I think the way Natasha put it, right? Maybe it was in the last episode or this episode. So getting to know the locals, right? Who's the local historians? Is there a local history society, which often have museums, right? So are there ways that one can get, I would add to that too, those local history societies often have websites. But one of the important themes here that Natasha was emphasizing is actually talking to the people who know things. And I'm adding to that too. What about diners? What about coffee shops? Who are the locals, right, that are out there? It doesn't mean everyone knows everything and people can't be wrong, but you get to have that human element, right? So this living, breathing life of a community, right? Its documents, its history, it's everyday life, it's the governance structures of an area, but it's the people, right? There are people that are making decisions over time about how an area should be dealt with, right? Governmentally or non-governmentally, right? For sure. Local history societies. Kathy, where you're from, is there a local history society?
Oh, gee, I've only lived here since 2014. I'm sure, oh no, I'm sure there's plenty of those in Southern California. I
Yeah.
would think they're all over the place, yes. And I have a friend who, she's retired now, but she worked on Channel Islands and she worked in Atlanta area for a while.
Yeah.
Historical restoration. She has her master's and all this jazz. We're very, very bright person, and she did a lot of that kind of stuff. So she would know. So she lives in Ventura, and so
Yeah.
she would know a lot of. I'm sure there's plenty here in Southern California. Yes.
Yep, that'd be, in a way, you could say, well, the more populated or the bigger the area and the more societies and the more historical knowledge, that's more to sort through, right? More to sort through. But yeah, there would be a lot to get to know, because I know I don't live in Pittsburgh now, but I'm originally from Pittsburgh and from out in the suburban area, but of course know the city area well, the outside area, the old mill towns on the river. And so each of those areas have their own history society. Of course, moving to North Dakota, it's a state that has a lot of interest in history, from the small towns to the, relative to North Dakota, bigger cities. And so remember, there's the population, right? Fewer than 1 million people, less than 1 million people here. So it's different than living in Pennsylvania. So Tammy, how about you? Is there a local history society where you're from?
Yes, there's a Fort Worth Historical Society.
Yeah. And do they have a museum?
They do, yes. Of course, it's not really operating right now because of COVID, but yes, there is a museum that they do tours and things like that.
Yeah. Tanya, how about you? Is there a historical society where you're at?
Yes, we have a couple small communities around where I live, and there's little historical areas there, and there is a historical society. I really haven't had any, reason to contact anyone so far or anything like that, but they are around. Yes.
Yeah. Laura, how about you? Did I ask you, is there a historical society where you're at? Okay, well, that's okay to pass. No problem with that. So, this is an important area. Get to know the locals, sort of build that local network. Very important. So I think that is a
Hi,
very...
I'm sorry. I had trouble with my microphone.
That's okay, Laura. Any
yeah.
local historical society where you're at?
I believe so. I haven't heard anything about it, but I know we have a lot of history here in museums. I'm in Baltimore, Maryland, so I'm sure if I looked into that, I could definitely find something of that nature.
Yeah. So if one were interested in a case and one were seeking some historical knowledge, right? One viable, if they're in the area, or even if they're not in the area, maybe start getting on the phone. If there are, whether it be documents or people around, or, maybe audio visual material, who knows, right? That could be helpful. That would be a great resource, or those sorts of areas. Okay, of course, Unfound has been doing work with geography and mapping. And I want to right now just go back to Natasha for some remaining material from her about that. And so and this is in the context again, let me get my sharing here. Again, she's this idea, but we want, obviously we're interested in what Unfound is doing, and wanting that to be part of our website circuit, keeping in mind that they're doing again, on the unfoundpodcast.com and on the YouTube channel, and tied to specific cases, right? There are map analyses out there for sure. Let me get this going here.
Okay, so that is really wonderful for the older cases. As you know, Unfound.
Tanya, can you hear that?
Yes, I can.
Okay, if one person can hear it, we all can hear it. Again, Tanya's commenting on the number of cases where there's map work that has been done and continuing to be done.
Is over 4 years old by now, and covered hundreds of missing person cases. And we don't want to forget anyone, of course, but some of the older cases that were covered earlier on may feel a little bit neglected. So what happens with the map analysis going into an older case is that it kind of just reinvigorates the episode, the content, that entire genre. And that really helps with the YouTube algorithm, because apparently, obviously, YouTube probably favors newer content. So the fact that map analysis is now being added to certainly the new cases and the older cases, as we go on, more and more will have their map analysis as applicable, because not every case lends itself to map analysis. Then that is bringing light to both the new cases that we're covering. By new, I mean recently covered on Unfound, and the older cases. So the first thing that comes to mind when looking at a map analysis and watching, and taking the map analysis video from Unfound, is that mainly it personifies the victim. And it's just this instant reminder that this is not entertainment. This actually happened. And many times, I believe it's a Google Map and Google Earth that is being used, Google Earth primarily. It's just a lot of information just coming in, a lot of visual information. So, for example, what house did they live in? What's down the street? Sometimes, depending on the case, of course, it would be, this is the route, number of miles, the distance to and from work, and then the person disappeared, for example. So you can see all that with your own eyes right here, right now. There's even a map analysis playlist on the Unfound Podcast YouTube channel. So if you care to binge on all of these, feel free. And so we're talking about a real person that is now missing. And it's just a little bit jarring to realize that in many of the cases, these missing people, they're just like you and me. I go to and from work. It isn't really a long distance, just like this particular case. So it may make the listener, the viewer, more invested in trying to help us solve these missing person cases. Also, and of course, Edward is narrating as he goes, so it isn't just this visual thing. I mean, he's talking about the case and explaining as he goes. So it's just full of rich information, not only but audio, but video and visual as well. So it's just wonderful, really, really wonderful. And if you have been watching them, or you are going to watch them, then you can easily see what I mean. One is able to discern, and sometimes what is talked about is the topography. So in one particular case, it was centered around a golf course. And then it was easy to see not only the golf course, but then where could the person go from there if the person just walks off. And it seemed to be kind of a bit, challenging of terrain. It wasn't like developed and maybe a little bit hilly. And like I said, not really developed. So in one of the private Patreon discussions, what was brought up in that particular case is what is the weight of the individual, because if the person is heavy set, then it may be difficult to traverse challenging terrain. So it's just wonderful to have this information readily available and to talk with like minds of these things, these concerns that come up, these questions that come up via the map analysis. Another thing that can be done is to overlay a local map with the Unfound map analysis. So you get your downtown city map, if that would be the case, and then you overlay that with the Unfound map analysis learnings, and then you're able to see a big picture view, not only of the area in question, but then the corresponding cityscape or lack thereof, depending on whether it's rural or developed. Another plus is that it's sometimes one is able to discern whether the area is affluent just by looking at the buildings, looking at the houses, whether it's affluent or otherwise. But for all the answers that we're getting from the map analysis, many questions emerge. In another episode, we were able to see with our own eyes, with the map analysis, that the distance from a relative's house to the victim's house was really not that far at all. And that was highlighted and discussed in the map analysis video. Well, lo and behold, a few weeks later, it wasn't really that long, but still, I think maybe about 2 weeks. The victim, the missing person, their car was actually found parked by the side of their house. Now, I guess it wasn't, the obvious spot where the car is parked. I guess maybe it was more to the side, but there was obviously some discussion about this case. Was the discussion pertained to it? Well, if the family member, close family member or friend, I think it was a family member, did not live that far away, as indicated by the map analysis video, then why wouldn't the family member, walk around the house of the victim? One would have been able to find something as important as the car, the person's car. It was readily seen. So as expected, there is so much information in the map analysis video, and of course, Edward's explanations along the way, that it just brings about even more questions, which is really wonderful. So.
Okay, so Natasha there has given us a very helpful overview of why the map analysis with some concrete examples for a large growing framework like Unfound can be helpful for ongoing insights. Right now, again, as I always emphasize, right, the podcast is the main thing, and as Ed has even emphasized in a recent map video, right, this is a supplement to the episodes. But boy, when you start putting together the material, right, the episode itself, some of the other lead up material, map analysis that's done, right, that gives you more insight, that gives you more perspective, right, qualitative, quantitative. Tanya, you're, again, we're folks here are think tank folks. You keep up on these cases in different ways. Tanya, through Unfound's work, how have you found the map analysis part helpful, if you've kept up on it?
I think it's really interesting. I've seen it on YouTube, the videos, and I also know on the Unfound, the website, the Unfound podcast website.
Yes.
There's also an area there where you have all the videos, but that kind of reminds me of the latest update that Ed did and mentioned Eric France with the vehicle of his that's just been found recently. And I know Ed had mentioned that had he known about the garage or about the Eric's ex-wife and working for the elderly man as a caregiver, she ended up giving her car to him and then putting it in a garage. And I just remember him saying that had he known that she worked for that person, he would have been looking at that property and noticed the difference between years ago when all of this first happened and the fact that the garage doors were different. One had a window, one didn't. And then maybe looking at it again years later and noticing that there's been a change and now there's no garage, there's no windows in the garage. So that just kind of, that brought that up to me. It's interesting to be able to look at these maps and put things together like, we weren't able to do years ago. So anyway, that just popped up.
Yeah. And again, what is subtle? What is obvious? What kind of study does that take? And again, good lead in, Tanya, that you mentioned. Again, the unfoundpodcast.com. And again, Natasha reminding us in some of her other material, right? There's blogging done with specific cases. Right, the episodes come out on Podomatic. They're pushed over to you. They're also featured on YouTube. Where some of this other material ends up, there's discussion that goes on in the private Patreon blog. There's let's also add there's think tank discussion and so forth. And so there's movement, there's reflection, there's discussion going forth. And again, Tanya, you've been talking about this for months now, and we're finally, I think we're getting to an area where we can put some concrete thinking on how crowdsourcing might work and how credible, qualified people. Well, Natasha encouraged, and I think the whole team would agree here. Well, if you're in an area, right, where there's a case, right, or you're traveling to an area where there's a case that's been on Unfound, again, following some of the ideas and protocols, and including safety and knowing the laws that we've talked about. Well, is there information that you can give on a particular area? Are there pictures that could be provided? Other information? What does the property look like now? Right. So get in touch with Unfound, particularly Ed. Right. Provide contact information for follow up. Anyone that's hearing this episode too, not just the folks that are here. Right. Is this, and then for that follow up for ongoing consideration. And again, not necessarily everything that everyone sends to Unfound is going to get featured. That's not the promise here, but it gets into the mix of consideration that Ed and or the team can look at. And then of course Ed deciding what gets run with. But boy, this could open some doors. So Tammy, how about you? This mapping that's been going on with Unfound, how's that resonated with you or been helpful to thinking about these cases?
I think that, so I've looked at a lot of the map analysis, and I think one of the good things is it helps you to put, to kind of apply distance perspective.
Yeah.
So sometimes when they say, when, let's say, a quote unquote suspect or someone who might be suspected in causing the disappearance says, well, someone walked off and went, over here or something. And you're like, wait a second, they walked 10 miles? So, I mean, not impossible, but it kind of calls some things into question. And so I think that the main thing that I kind of get out of it is, for one, the topography and also the distance perspective of different locations.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Proximity and distance, very important considerations. Yeah, both from an objective and subjective point of view. and trying to think through things and what might be realistic and what might be reasonable. Of course, again, as Natasha said there, we look at these things, we think we're getting some answers, but it's also raising more questions, right? Which of course is part of that ongoing study of things. Kathy, how about you? How has the map work through Unfound helped you with some of these cases?
But the more information we know, the better. It may raise more questions, but I think I've been saying this all along, that the map analyses, they are just vital. To me, I was doing that even before Ed started doing those.
Yeah.
Can I see the area maybe where the person disappeared, where they lived? We don't have that. For example, I think it was Patrick Reed, where we're not sure exactly when he disappeared. He supposedly went to Florida. Well, we don't know. But ones where we have more specific address or where they hung out with the map, where do people of that culture, where do they go? Where do people populate? If somebody's more suicidal, where might they have walked off? And so you can get all this wealth of information from what you look at the map analysis. Then you can go on and look up more information and get more clues, more information. You know, we're in the information gathering business here, trying to help these disappearances. So for me, and I'm a very statistical, detailed person, and so gathering all this kind of stuff, just maybe it raises questions, but boy, it opens possibilities that may tend to shut down others. It's just totally invaluable. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and you can see why I find I'm so enthused about this topic and why I think this is going to continue to be on our horizon with different tips and resources. This is so important. Laura, how about you? Have you been keeping up on the map analysis work and so forth?
Yes, I do. Because I'm a very visual learner anyway, and I pay attention to detail. So when I'm listening to the cases, I'm already kind of picturing in my head, like, okay, what is this location they're in? Where is this happening? And I think by looking and seeing the maps and really being able to see the distances and see exactly, it helps. It can really help with the visual in my head because I'm already kind of picturing when I hear it, and then to actually see it on screen and see it gives you a better idea about the case.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, and so I know, and there are a number of opportunities, a number of cases where, as Natasha emphasized, where the map work's been done. I kind of reviewed, and just seeing some of the very things we're talking about. Obviously, a recent case that Ed has covered, right? Thomas Charles Murray Jr., right? TJ. And so there was some lead up material that was really important, but I'll be honest with you, some of the things, again, as a supplement, as Ed emphasized, the map analysis for disappearance that's on YouTube really does put some things in perspective. Again, back to issues of proximity and distance, seeing things, even things that may be different between now and 10 years ago or whatever. So, I mean, that was very helpful. And again, it then begins to raise more questions. And I don't know if everyone had a chance to look at this particular map analysis, but yeah, that was one. And there are others, but I would encourage folks to check out that case if they haven't already. I know, was that, and again, I'm a little behind on everything as usual. Was that part of the discussion on Sunday night, Kathy?
Part of the discussion as far as the map.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that was very well done. And I, even before the week, because since that was delayed a week,
Yeah.
I had looked up all the 3 bars that were involved, seeing the area. You got like one bar place that was kind of more on the, I would call run down side. Some of the others were newer, like newer mall. And I realized he disappeared. It's been a while, several years ago, but and I think one of them has already changed hands, the first bar on the rocks. But no, that was very invaluable to see, since he took off from the 3rd bar going south, and then where his phone was in the north of the road that goes to the interstate. So to put all that in perspective, the roads, the streets, the people, the weather, you've got to consider, what kind of weather is in this. You got to consider all these things, and then you can get, you can analyze it better.
Yeah,
It's great.
that's the weather part. That's a whole nother component. That's outstanding. And also you remind me, and we all know this, but now again, seeing these connections, Kathy, commercial information is available in municipalities and in states, state level business databases, local, whatever's depending on the municipality involved, various directories that maybe chambers of commerce have, et cetera. When you're trying to zero in on a commercial business and on a commercial property, there's information out there that's available. So that's a really important thing. Laura, did you get a chance? And again, I don't know who was there Sunday night. Laura, did you keep up on this case at all?
Yes, I listened to the case. I didn't make the think tank though, but I did keep up with the map analysis and I listened to the case.
Great. Tammy, how about you? Were you involved Sunday, or did you do the map analysis, keep up on the map analysis?
I did. I watched the part of the map analysis, and then I had to take care of something and wasn't able to go back to it. But yeah, and I think that, like one thing that you were just talking about was, the commercial information. So there was one that ended up not getting covered, but I was trying to figure out from where the guy left the bar to his home, how far that was. Only knew the road of his apartment complex or the street. And there were 3 apartment complexes. So I thought, okay, it had to be one of these. Well, I went to different searches to look up. I wanted to see when these complexes were built. Well, I ruled out one of them because it was built after the disappearance. So it couldn't have been that one. So it had to have been one of the other 2. So just narrowing it down by looking at things like that.
Yeah, well, again, the more we learn, the more questions we have, back to Natasha's point, right? Tanya, and again, I don't know who was all there Sunday. Did you keep up on this map analysis and so forth?
No, I didn't. I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay, that's okay, right? So there is so much to do and so much to get to, but that's a good thing. This material is out there. This is, like so many of these cases, it's fascinating, and the map adds, again, so many layers, and then reminds us, again, back to some of the original ideas that Natasha and I and we are and have brought up and are bringing up. We have a map. We have a case. We have what we know. We have what we want to know. The map gives us certain, perspectives or certain further questions. And then we start to zero in on particular locations. We think about what do we want to know more about it. Again, this weather point, right? That's a whole nother consideration to think about too nowadays. And with and that might or might not have been either explicit or implicit in some of what Natasha was saying, but we have weather information available. There's various government sites that can do that, and even looking into weather history and weather patterns. If we're getting to know an area, of course, some things might be obvious, like, oh, if you're in North Dakota, it's going to be cold, potentially cold so many months out of the year. Well, there are other nuances to that, right? It can also get very hot for a certain part of the summer, and there are things that pertain to agriculture and the amount of water and droughts and all sorts of things. And so any area, right, has this sort of discussion. There are nuances, right? So what is obvious, what is subtle, right? So no, this is exciting material. We could go through case after case. That was one. Obviously, there are many. Again, from a crowdsourcing standpoint, I think itself, what Unfound has in place now, right, between at a good level, at an active level. You have the think tank group, you have the regular Facebook group that's tied to the podcast. You have even the Facebook page where Ed's, sharing material. We're then resharing that. There's Twitter, there's email, whatever. There are ways, and not even just on mapping, but specifically when it comes to geography and mapping, where, some of this crowdsourcing can continue and can expand. Okay, but back to just data in general. Okay, so we use the term data journalism. Okay, and again, we just talk about the use of data, different examples. And so whether you're trying to, again, raise awareness, whether you're trying to, be a more informed viewer or listener, if you're doing some of your own advocacy work, again, even the idea of data can be important. American Press Institute, AmericanPressInstitute.org. There, other places too, but there it provides some citations. Again, this will eventually be on Data Gems, right? Different ways of thinking about data and journalism. Obviously, the internet drives a lot of this. It's obviously, if you're thinking journalistically, you still have to always be attentive to those old-fashioned things that matter in terms of accuracy and looking at documents and cultivating and ethically and effectively working with human sources, things that we've talked about. But data has provided opportunities for people to get this perspective, to get more quantitative and qualitative material. Of course, one has to be careful about inaccuracies or even at times just sloppy data or disinformation or dishonest material. But again, someone who's doing work, whether that be journalism or advocacy or awareness or any of it, right? Obviously these resources are out there. Mapping provides a way to sort through it. It's certainly not the only element, but it's a manifestation of it, right? So we're seeing different examples of this. I want to mention some things here. This goes back to a site we mentioned last time. This is, remember, missingkids.org, missingkids.org. And again, we will, on their issues, if you go to the issues and long-term missing, click on long-term missing. And again, we'll link this eventually. They have an interactive map, right? Remember, missingkids.org. So from their website, they have an interactive map of long-term missing and unidentified child map. This is one example, right? And if you go to that map, there'll be various links on it, locations. Some have zip codes and so forth. Links to the poster. Remember, they're putting together material. So they're doing more advocacy, right? But they're linking to resources. They're using the NamUs.gov. And I use a little bit of NamUs. I'm not a NamUs expert. There's some members of the team who are much better than NamUs than I. I noticed on a discussion, Florida International University, National Forensic Science Tech Center, Technology Center, people can use NamUs to do mapping, even map out things like travel resources and so forth. Anyone here use NamUs a lot? Again, I'm not a NamUs expert. I have some dexterity with it, but not a strong functionality. Anyone here using NamUs a lot? Okay, this is one we've mentioned before. Okay, but it definitely is a source that has locational material. So this national long-term missing and unidentified child map, right? Missingkids.org. Boy, it puts things in perspective. Okay, and again, if you go to missingkids.org, we talked about that last time, and click on the issues and then go down to long-term missing. Scroll down and you'll see that link, right? Empowering the public to help. Okay, so this is keeping citizens in the know, helping the search for and identification of missing children. Number of states, I'm sure I got Missouri State Highway Patrol. They have an active missing persons map. Now they're saying that they're getting the data from National Crime Information Center, but again, county by county, I bet you, there's probably a lot of that out there. This is one example, right? I don't, every state by state doesn't necessarily have that to the same way. Another area, I heard of this a long time ago. And for this episode, this is not just a missing person thing. Murderdata.org, murderdata.org. That's the Murder Accountability Project. This has been featured on the Atlantic YouTube channel. One of the main guys there, Thomas Hargrove, has done a TEDx talk. You can find that on YouTube. They're using data, basically looking at obviously various unsolved homicides, uses of algorithm and so forth, looking at locations, thinking about possibly serial killers, for instance. If anything, whether one gets into the weeds, so to speak, of the whole statistical discussions about algorithms in solving crimes, there's no question, and you could see it's a very credible website, murderdata.org. This one of the main guys here was a journalist and is bringing that and getting to know, working with people who are data experts. It at least raises awareness about these cases and so forth. That's another example, the Murder Accountability Project. Again, this will be linked. There's a number of resources on that site, by county, by state, and so forth, for sure. Anyone else know of any other resources out there that are using locational sorts of things to, whether it has to do with missing persons in particular or crime in general? Tanya, are you aware of any other things than what I'm mentioning here?
I am not.
Okay, and that's okay. Kathy?
No, I'm not, have experience in that area, sorry.
That's okay. Tammy, anything you'd like to offer?
No, not specifically missing persons. There's Google Earth Pro to look at topography and stuff, but nothing. I know that the Texas Department of Public Safety has a website of, it's like a missing database, and you can search by county, by, they were last seen in, Dallas or something like that. So there are a lot of parameters that you can enter into the Texas DPS search engine.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And again, at a state and county level, one should get quite familiar with those sorts of resources that are out there. Laura, any suggestions you'd have along these lines?
I'm not sure the name of it at this moment. It was something that I saw in my area, Baltimore. I don't know if it's just specifically missing persons or just crime in general. It was an app that we could pull up locally that would show, where crime is happening in certain areas. And then I know there's also like a police department website that has specific tabs for missing persons too, and showing when and where they went missing, and go by the years and dates, and you can search by any kind of criteria.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And again, get to know those state and local resources, right? State level, local level, federal level. Don't forget USA.gov, folks. USA.gov, right? If you're searching .govs. And again, a lot of data out there, qualitative and quantitative. Might make sense. Maybe I should start doing it too, searching on there more for things pertaining to geography and mapping. Now, back to another area. Remember, in the past, we've talked about journalists, toolbox.org, journalists, toolbox.org, JOURNALISTS box.org. Remember, that's presented by the Society of Professional Journalists. There are a number of resources. If you scroll down, one of the they have a data, if you click data journalism, right, that'll bring, there's also a mapping resources too, I noticed. So there's just a ton of material there. So they go to mapping and geocoding. And there's just a whole, I mean, you could go on and on in terms of material that will help with things. And as a couple of you have sort of pointed to, right, we don't necessarily have to use things that directly or only pertain to missing persons or cold cases or unsolved this or that. These other resources give us material sort of go to, again, to use this term here, toolbox, to go to if we want to know more about an area. So whether it's topography or weather or local history, right? If I'm saying, okay, what do I need inductively and or deductively to think through to understand this area better? Again, we're back to context, right? This is a theme we've dealt with, right? I'm going to go to that. That's going to be a go-to for me. So understanding these other data and geography and mapping resources are going to be helpful. Example, again, I'm linking this right off Journalist Toolbox. We'll put this on Data Gems. It was linked on that page. Again, this isn't necessarily about missing persons or cold cases, but we've talked about cultural knowledge. We've talked about Latino communities. Okay, one of the links on that site, this is from City University of New York, Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism, State of the Latino News Media. They have a map, the Latino Media Report, journalism.cuny.edu. Again, we'll link that on Data Gems, and that's already listed on that Journalist Toolbox under probably mapping and geocoding tools, maybe, or one of the other sections. Regardless, I'm looking at this map, okay? I'm just gonna jump over to Nebraska, right? Nebraska, I click, there's dots over the map with different coding at the top, right? Within it, whether that's a newsletter, a podcast, a wire service, web only, TV, so it's media types, right? So let's say I needed to, whether it be for a case or I'm wanting to keep up with this in general for whatever reason, I click on that Nebraska, Buenos Dias, Nebraska, I get that information, right? What I can see the access that's available, their social media. Boy, who knows? Maybe if I'm looking at a case, I'm needing to build some contacts in the Hispanic community. I'm needing to know more about that. I'm needing to think through some media outlets. Wow, there's something nearby there on this map. That's interesting, okay? That's one example. So if you go off of that Journalist Toolbox, I mean, there's all sorts of material there pertaining to maps, and this is another one, National Land Cover Database, MRLC.gov, right? Multi-Resolution Land Characteristics Consortium. Okay, so this is getting into things that's another example. Okay, so there's a lot of material there, right? Geojournalism.org, Polymaps. I'm just reading off the thing. So these are things that you can go through. But again, back to let's go just take a step back to Unfound. There's already a framework in place, right? Now I know we're all sort of really authentic fans of the great work of Unfound. Some folks are doing some of their own work. They're using Unfound as a sort of big picture resource. It's tremendous work. This map analysis is great. There's a framework in place where I think we can continue to do some of the crowdsourcing work and expand that, as Natasha had said, right? If someone's in an area, and to start sending that through. So I'm going to come back to you, Tanya, because you've been talking about this for months. How can we get more people, credible and qualified people, to get out there, get boots on the ground, and start taking pictures and gathering information for the Unfound community?
I love that, like the whole crowdsourcing thing. And I have this image in my mind of what it would look like. But as far as getting the word out, other than putting it on social media and having people work together to share that information, I'm not sure. I'm not good at the marketing part of it, I don't think, or the getting it out there, the sharing part.
Yeah.
But I have a picture in my mind. I think it would be so great to have groups of volunteers, like kind of like a fire department has when somebody has that 911, and they call 911 and that group of people come out and everybody has that specific job that they do and that they're really good at. But as far as sharing it, I'm not sure exactly.
Yeah, no, I'll be honest with you. I'm always talking about collaboration, and I've kind of talked a good game about it, and both things that pertain to Unfound and separate from Unfound. I've thought about it, and of course I'm doing more now, and I'm excited about some of the stuff that I'm doing with Ed and the team. But I want to do more. I want to encourage more for Unfound. I want to do more for some of the other cases I'm interested in. Some not even missing persons, some are. I think there's things. The Unfound platform itself has a framework already. There are a few other things, and again, this might be part of our to be continued, but there are resources out there that can be used. Kathy, how about you? How can we get more people crowdsourcing photos, crowdsourcing information tied to specific cases to Unfound?
Are you talking about like going out and interviewing people? Actually
I would say let's photographs, taking notes, maybe talking to some local historians or history societies, maybe interviewing other people, whatever it takes.
That would be good. Yeah, for the people who live in the area, if you're talking about missing persons or crimes or whatever, to do that, but hard for all who live far away from, I live far away from most, except unless they're in California. And you realize now, right now, California is still a very closed state. They told us you can't even travel more than 120 miles away from your house.
Yeah, obviously COVID makes it.
Yeah, it's just, so doing all these things, just kind of like, kind of put it on hold. But I think Tanya gave some good suggestions on trying to, the crowdsourcing thing, trying to maybe market, put the word on the internet or in certain groups of people who live in certain areas, can help out with things or help do research or help meet people or interview people, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and there are ways, again, social media can be a part of that, at least on the networking side. There is some discussion out there, and again, we need to continue to expand this discussion of how social media and so forth can even play a direct or indirect role in all this. Tammy, how about you? Any suggestions about how we can turn it up a notch in terms of crowdsourcing photographs, information, so forth to Unfound for some of these cases?
Yeah, I think, I think about the Tiffany Johnson case, which is probably the most well-known where I live, where she disappeared was probably about 20 minutes from me. And so I think that it might, and I know that Ed is lurking, but it might be good, because so the pros and cons. What I don't want is for people to be bombarding Ed with a bunch of stuff that he has no need for.
Yep.
So because that's just going to be a waste of time that he doesn't have. And so I don't know, maybe it could be something where one of the assistants, or something like that says, hey, we need some pictures of this specific, field or this specific area, or something like that, and ask for volunteers who may live in that area, but to be very specific about what is needed. And so there's not just a whole bunch of junk being sent to him. I know that I listened to another podcast, not a missing person. It's a investigative podcast, and about wrongful convictions.
Yeah.
And there was a case that was actually in the, I'm originally from Dallas. I actually know more about Dallas than I do Fort Worth. I've only been out here about 5 years. But, and the case happened to be in Dallas. And there were about 10 of us in the area, obviously this was pre-COVID, that all met at the high school where the murder occurred, to get an idea of what all was around there, the path she took, and different things like that. So I think that things like that are helpful as well for any, locals who may be around and willing to do something like that.
Yeah, and so from this conversation, we got some important things. One is, of course, again, Kathy, post-COVID, some of this stuff's going to have to wait. No doubt about it. We want that, again, know your laws, know your policies, be healthy. However, as we move forward, which we will, we don't want to bog down Unfound with, everything. And so I think this is a good mindset here. Let's exhaust everything we can in terms of open source intel, right? Social media intelligence, available resources, right? All the sorts of things. And then from there, and again, Ed and the team, right? What are some specifics that might be helpful? And, this goes back to, again, the platforms in place between the think tank and the Facebook groups and the social media and email, right? And, whatever, right? And so that platform's in place where if it's specific and then it's not going to bog down the process. Large enough in scope that it's still moving forward towards truth, but I think that's a good point, right? We just don't want a bunch of everything. This is not the same as, although this can be valuable at times, taking tips from a large scale audience. This is not exactly the same as putting a page up on the internet and says, if you know something, submit it. This is similar, but a distinct thing. This is, I think what you're getting at is, this is more targeted. We need this, we're looking for this, or if you happen to be in this area. And again, the question Natasha had about things that have been done on Unfound, including for map analysis. What does the property look like now? Is there any information that any light that you could shed on that, right? If you live in that area. And so that's important.
Right. I was thinking about that as well. I was thinking, if there was a disappearance that was local and the mapping was done and it showed, a pond or something, just for example,
yeah.
That, because you live 4 miles from there, that 2 weeks there was a big fire out there and that pond was drained and there was nothing in it.
Yep.
So you could kind of just relay that kind of information that someone doing, the ed, of course, wouldn't know. And because it just happened, or different things like that.
Yeah, no, that's insightful. Absolutely. Okay, we're getting close to the end here. Let me say a few quick things, and then, as always, any last thoughts. Again, tonight, and this is probably going to be part of the to be continued. I'm saying here tonight, we have things in place for Unfound. Certainly, there are areas about mapping, about geography, about data, about platforms. I didn't say a lot about platforms tonight. I know, like I said in the past, for things not even related to cold case journalism, but then eventually journalism, there's the platform I've been most familiar with over the years and haven't used it as much as I should, and maybe now need to rethink this. Crowdmap.com, if you've ever been to that site. Well, they're tied, actually they were tied to, and now they're suggesting to go Ushahidi, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, USHAHIDI.com, USHAHIDI.com. That's really where you go now. And the basic self-service Ushahidi Basic is free. There may be some other upsell. They are keeping things up to date. It provides some basic mapping capabilities where then people can actually take reports and communicate with whomever. So whether they're doing journalism or whether they're doing some other sort of effort where they'd want to have a community connection. Obviously things like crowd maps, and you can see this here, whether you're dealing with deploying a map in a time of emergency or crisis, or something that's part of an ongoing effort, right? You can see that this platform. More to say, there are other platforms, there are other examples out there. There are certainly the idea of mapping and data is not without controversy, and certainly there's at least one, and I'm sure there are others examples of how, whether it's missing persons, cold cases, or other things, certainly these things can lead to interesting discussions or controversy. This is definitely going to be something that's going to be continued for us. Again, important things will slowly but surely be updated on the Data Gems page. What a great discussion tonight. Kathy, is there any last thoughts you'd have as we close down this discussion tonight?
I guess maybe we can cover this more next time, but I neglected to mention that the mapping geography is one of the main things that it's important is for searches, and how they can do hundreds of searches and they still miss. You know, I think searches are just so vital in disappearance cases.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be a to be continued for this episode, whether it's the next one or a few down. That we will cover. I'm noting it right now. Searches, etc., related to searches, very important. Tanya, is there any last thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
No, I thought this was great and I learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you all as always for participating. Tammy, any last thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
I don't think so, not that I can think of.
Okay, well, again, thanks to you folks who participated tonight. Thanks to all the think tank members. When this is available publicly, thanks to those who are listening, please share this. Please continue. Again, the unfoundpodcast.com. Again, this was episode number 7 of Unfound on the Ground, geography and mapping for missing persons cases. As I always say, someone out there knows something or knows someone who knows something. Keep up the good work, folks. Be safe out there and have a blessed and great new year. Thank you very much. I'm now stopping the recording.